Okay, so I hope you can all hear me. Amy, can you hear me? Amy's my co-host tonight.
Yes, I can hear you, Susie. Sounding good.
Perfect. That means we're all working. So yeah, I am Susie, one of the farm vets here at Oak Hill. I have a particular interest in calves and calf health. I kind of work alongside the vet tech team, and we run calf housing assessments and overall calf management assessments. And as part of the herds person course, I run the calf section on that. So tonight, I'm going to go through this presentation, this module with you, which is going to be on Youngstock, but mainly focusing on pneumonia, as we have obviously we're right in pneumonia season at the moment. Unfortunately, there is a lot of it about, so I thought it would be most use to you guys. My co-host tonight is Amy, so she's going to help me out with questions and things. So if you do have any questions throughout the evening, then please just write them in the chat box, which I think is along the bottom of your screen. And we'll answer them all at the end. And if there's any we don't get round to, we'll email them through to you. Please do stay muted while you're on, because if we have everyone just unmuted and shouting out, it will be carnage. Yeah, so hopefully this talk will last about 45 minutes to an hour. So firstly, I do have some polls that I'm going to run throughout the meeting to keep you all awake. So the first one, which hopefully you can see, is how old are you? So if that's just popped up, if you can just answer. And then I'll try and gauge, the things that I'm talking about today towards, towards what age group we've got on, because there might be quite a wide range, but I'll try and aim it towards who we've got most of. Don't worry, it's all anonymous, so I won't be able to see who said what. Brilliant. Thank you all for answering that. I will show you the results. So it looks like we've got most people are in the bracket 15-20, great. And then we've got a bit of a range. We've got a few that are too old. Sorry to hear you're too old. I'm too old too. Great, we'll get on with the talk. There we go. Great. So the plan for this evening is I'm going to firstly start with the background of why your calves are so important. And then I'm going to go into a little bit of background about what is pneumonia, what's it caused by. I'm going to go over clinical signs. Going to go into why does it matter, what impact does it have, and then into how we can prevent it, and finally into treatment. So why are your calves so important? So these are the animals on your farm which are maybe easily forgotten, as they're not the ones that you're milking twice or more times a day, and they're not the ones that are producing milk at the moment, so they're also not earning the farm any money. They are more like an investment, and they will actually only start paying for themselves and paying you back for all those rearing costs and all that effort you've put into rearing them when they do start milking. And generally, these calves are so important because they will be the ones that are the best genetics on your farm, or the highest genetic merit, if we're being fancy. So whenever you are buying semen, or your farm is buying semen, or you're picking a bull, generally you'll be picking the bulls that are better than what your herd is at the moment, because you want your herd to continue and to improve and to be more efficient, to produce more milk, to be healthier. So generally, these calves that are born are the sum of those bulls that you've chosen, and then you'll put those bulls to some of your best cows, some of your favourite, most efficient, most healthy cows. So the calves that are landing on the ground are going to be the highest genetic merit, the best genetics on your farm. So you've put a lot of effort into those, and you want to keep them healthy. Also, young calves, so calves 0 to 2 months old, do have the highest food efficiency. So that means if you give those young calves 100 grams of feed, they will put 50 grams of that feed into growth. So they're really efficient. They're putting 50% of what you feed them into growing. However, if you compare this to an animal that's about 12 months old, if you give that 100 grams of feed, it's only going to put 10 grams of it into growing. So it's nowhere near as efficient. It's instead using a lot of that feed to keep warm, to move, everything else. So yeah, you're getting most growth out of the feed you put into them at this age group. They are most efficient. And then if you have high growth rates, so if you have them growing faster at a younger age, it means that they'll get to their first stage at calving quicker. And as I mentioned earlier, they only start producing money for your farm when they start milking. So if you can get them to grow faster and grow better, then they'll have a lower age at calving. Generally, heifers are only profitable once they get halfway through the second lactation. So it does take quite a while for these cows to break even in your herd and start generating you some money. And then we've also found that if you manage to double the birth weight by weaning, so if that calf doubles in size by time of weaning, it will give you 250 extra litres in its first lactation. And then if you have a growth rate of 1 kilogram a day, so they're putting on 1 kilogram a day rather than half a kilogram a day, it means you get an extra 1,000 extra litres in the lifetime. So what happens in this pre-weaning stage does have a massive impact on how good they are at milking later and how good a cow they are for you in later life. And then lastly, this area of your farm has a huge potential to affect the profitability of your herd, because obviously all farms are businesses, and if they don't make money, they can't carry on. So we do need to always be looking to make profits. And when you look at the different areas of farms and where they spend money, usually this is the second largest variable cost after feed. So often it's 20% of the farm's production costs go towards this area. So it is really important area to look at and to make sure it is being efficient. Incidentally, vet costs are tiny in comparison. Okay, now what is pneumonia? So pneumonia literally means inflammation of the lungs. And as I'm sure a lot of us know, the lungs' purpose in the body is to take in air, and then from that air, take oxygen out of it, and then that oxygen will be delivered to organs and muscles in the body. And then any poisonous carbon dioxide from the muscles and organs will be taken back out through the air, out of the lungs. However, if we have pneumonia, then we get inflammation in those lungs. So we get thickening of the lining in the lungs, we get extra secretions and fluid in the lungs. And that means that this gaseous exchange, this exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide can't work as efficiently. And that's why calves with pneumonia, you'll see them blowing. So that's when they put loads of effort into breathing. You see them coughing because they're trying to get all that fluid out. So that is why we see the signs we do with pneumonia. And I think as vets and as farmers, it's very easy to get complacent about pneumonia and just get used to hearing coughing calves. But pneumonia is life-threatening. It does kill calves, and it's a nasty disease. And as humans, if we get it, then often we're hospitalized. And, unfortunately, it's life-threatening in humans as well. So it's something that we should be taking note of and trying to reduce and even eliminate. Now, through our genetic selection of the cow, we've actually selected for a cow that has quite a small, so if we look at this small area that is the lungs, so if we look at this diagram of the cow, I'm really sorry, it's really poor quality. It was the best I could find. But this area here is how much of the cow's body is taken up by the lungs, and all this area is the guts. And actually, in proportion to a cow's metabolic demands, they have a really small area dedicated to their lungs. And this reduced capacity contributes to their reduced resistance to pneumonia. So that's why they are more prone to getting pneumonia than other species. And then the things that cause the pneumonia. So we've got a few different viruses. So we've got RSV, PI3, IBR, BVD, and even coronavirus. So the main ones generally that are on farm, and they're on most farms, are RSV and PI3, and they are the main ones that do cause pneumonia. IBR, yes, sometimes does and can contribute. And then coronavirus. Now in cows, obviously we know a lot about coronavirus from the past year or so. And in cows, generally, we think it more causes scour. However, sometimes we do find it in lung washes. And, you know, I think there'll be more and more research and work done as to how much of an issue it causes with respiratory disease. But generally, it is more RSV and PI3, the viruses that we see with pneumonia. We do have other bacterial causing pneumonia as well. So we've got Mycoplasma, which is a nasty bug, Pasteurella, Histophilus, Mannheimia hemolytica, and Salmonella. So yeah, these generally, they can cause primary pneumonia, but certainly Pasteurella and Mannheimia often come in as secondary after one of these viruses has damaged the lungs, and then they come in and make it worse. Yeah, so often we get quite a few of these bugs all attacking the lungs at the same time. It might be a virus that started it, but then maybe a bacteria joins in and really causes quite a bit of damage. The reason why I've highlighted BVD and Salmonella in red is because these diseases you may not typically kind of associate with pneumonia in calves. You might more associate with abortion or diarrhea. But actually, if you're getting a lot of sick calves with pneumonia, then these can be underlying it. And it's certainly worth making sure that Salmonella and BVD is not joining in and causing a lower immunity or causing this disease. And both viruses and bacteria are tiny. So they're microscopic, we can't see them, they're aerosols in the air, or they're on the drinking teats or on the bars that cows love to chew. So we can't see them anywhere. And adult cows or even older calves often have some of these just in their nose or in their lungs that they're not suffering from, they're not showing any symptoms of, but they do shed a little bit. And so they can infect younger animals with them. Okay, so again, to check you're all awake, I've got, oh, that's annoying. I'm trying to load another poll for you. Here we go. Right, so I'll just bear with me a minute, and here we go. So what clinical signs do you typically see with pneumonia? Again, it's all anonymous, so don't worry about what you put at all, just join in. You can click many different choices here. So yeah, go ahead. I'll give you a minute or so just to say what kind of clinical signs generally you associate with pneumonia. And then we'll run through it. I've already given you one, so made it a bit easier. That's great. Yeah, unfortunately, this picture that's on the right is from a post-mortem, and that Charlie did the other week, and it is the lungs. The head is up towards like the left-hand side of the picture, and Charlie's kind of just cut through the ribs there, and it's really like these bits of stringy stuff that are attached up here, they're bits of fibrin, like the lung shouldn't be attached to to the ribs. It should be freely flowing and it shouldn't be stuck like this. And then there's bits of pus as well. So unfortunately, this was a calf with really bad pneumonia. Okay, right. Thank you very much, everyone, for voting. I'll end that and then I'll share them. So brilliant. So we've got mainly coughing, which is perfect. That is definitely a sign. Yes, swollen joints. You'd only really, I suppose, it wouldn't be a typical sign of pneumonia, possibly if you had salmonella going through as well. Scour. If you had really high temperature, which you often get with pneumonia, then sometimes that can cause a little bit of scour. So it wouldn't be that typical with pneumonia. It more be another scour bug jumping in, or due to the high temperature, you've got a bit of scour. Yeah, blowing, definitely increase in breathing, like I spoke about before, because we've affected the lungs. Discharge, yeah. Yeah, tears around the eyes, yeah, because the kind of the nose and the eyes are very much connected. So any discharge that's coming out the nose will you also get some inflammation around the eyes and a bit of discharge there. And then, yeah, you wouldn't typically expect a sore navel or a swollen ear with pneumonia. So thanks for all taking part. Okay, so yeah, I just run through these. So yeah, coughing, yeah, so pyrexia is just a fancy name for high temperature. Drooping ears, you can see as well. Yeah, increased respiratory rate, so that just means increased breathing and effort. So often they use their abdominal muscles to really try and get as much air in as possible. You might see them like extend their neck out because they're really trying to get as much air in as possible, maybe when they're lying down, when they're stood up. Inappetence, so yeah, often because of this high temperature, which makes them feel rubbish, they won't want to drink their milk either or eat anything. And then unfortunately, sometimes it can happen so quickly as well. You can get them die really quickly from it. There are a few more subtle clinical signs which it's worth looking out for, and often often you see changes in behaviour that happen before you actually see the disease. So if you notice a calf drinking a little bit slower, or if you've got an automatic feeder, they go to the feeder less frequently, or if they even drink less milk, so your feeder tells you, oh, they've drunk less milk, or you notice they've drunk less, then these signs often occur about a day or so before you see any pneumonia signs. So it's really worth taking note if you notice any of these and maybe looking at the calf. It might not be that the calf is going down with pneumonia, but it probably will be the calf is going down with some form of disease, whether that's scour or even joint ill or something. So it's worth looking at these calves and even maybe treating them if you know what disease it might be early, because the earlier you treat the disease, the better the cure rate. And then we've also found that sick calves lie down more, and they actually start lying and for longer, and they start doing this about 3 days before you see the disease. So even sooner before you see the change in the drinking, they actually end up lying down more. And they have looked at putting activity monitors on calves. So you know how we have activity monitors for cows to see when they're in heat or not? That might be something that happens in the future, is activity monitors, because it might be quite a sensitive way and an early warning sign to us that that calf is getting ill. Okay, so why does it matter? Well, so obviously for welfare, pneumonia is painful, and obviously it does cause death, so it's not something we want for animals on our farm. We don't want them to be suffering with. As I spoke about before, obviously every calf is really important, and you know, you've put a lot of effort into producing that calf, so we want it to continue and milk for you. The long-term effects, so oh no, I was going to do another poll for this. Right, I'm going to do another poll, but you might have just seen the answer. Right, so if a calf gets lung damage, or the fancy word is lung consolidation, in its first 8 weeks of life, how much less milk do you think it'll produce in its first lactation? Let's see. So I'm probably going to be really, really impressed with you all, because You've probably all just seen the answer. But yeah, it's amazing what happens at such an early on in a calf's life does have a major impact in their future. Right, brilliant. I will end that voting. Thank you all for voting. And I'll share the results. So most of you have got it right. It is 540 litres. So yeah, that's how much impact, and that's probably about 5% maybe of a heifer's yield for that year. So it's quite a lot. Right, great. So yeah, and they also found that the amount of lung damage that's there is proportional to the loss in daily live weight gain you get. So the more lung damage you have, the less your animals grow, which kind of makes sense, I guess, because if they can't get enough oxygen into their body, they're not going to grow as well, are they? It is a really costly disease. So it's thought to cost £43.25 per sick calf, and then you have an added cost of £29.58 for every calf that's in that group that looks apparently healthy. They will be affected, although you can't see them being affected. They'll be putting extra energy into fighting the pneumonia bugs that are going round. And there's an estimated lifetime cost for a heifer overall of £772, so it's quite a lot. And then generally, it is a very widespread disease, and there's many calves affected in an outbreak. So you maybe will only see clinical signs, so the coughing and things, in about 35% of the animals. But if you post-mortemed every single animal, actually double that number would have evidence of pneumonia. So you'd probably find, if you saw 35% coughing, you'd probably find 72% of the calves had actually been affected and there was some evidence of lung damage there. Yeah, so it's really widespread. And unfortunately, it is very common on farms. So there was one survey in the UK that asked loads of UK farmers, and 98% of farmers said that they'd had at least one case in the last year. And it's the most common reason for death between weaning and 10 months old. And it's a major reason why heifers don't make it to the lactating age. And this was quite a shocking study that came out. So this was from America, and it was from feedlots in America. But when they slaughtered those feedlot cattle, they looked at them and they found that 70% of them had some lung damage at slaughter. So that's massive, isn't it? And of those 70%, 30% of them, they didn't see any respiratory signs of them when they come through. And only 30% had a history, so had been reported to have had some pneumonia at some point. So that meant that 40% of them had undiagnosed or subclinicals. So subclinicals is the word we use when it has the disease, but you can't see it, you can't tell until you post-mortem it or do some testing. So yeah, so it's amazing actually how much it goes through a group. You only think a small proportion are affected, but actually it's like the iceberg analogy. You know how they say you only see the tip of the iceberg with yonis? Well, it's very similar with this disease as well. Okay, so moving on to prevention. I'm sure we're now all really convinced that we don't want any pneumonia. So how do we prevent it? So all disease issues in calves and in general really bottle down to a simple balance. So it's a balancing act between the calf's immunity and the infection pressure that the amount of bugs the calf comes into contact with. So if we can boost and make the calf's immunity as good as possible, and if we can reduce the infection pressure, so make sure the calf doesn't come into contact with many bugs, then we'll have a healthy calf. However, if unfortunately the calf's immunity isn't that great due to several reasons, and there's loads of bugs about on farm and the calf comes into contact with loads, then unfortunately that's when we get these disease outbreaks and deaths. So we'll just look at the left-hand side of that balance, the immunity. And the immunity consists of various different factors. So the first one, which is a really important one, is colostrum. And then there's also management stresses that affect calf immunity, the nutrition that the calf has, the environment the calf's living in, and vaccination as well can boost immunity. So we'll concentrate on colostrum. Okay, so colostrum, the original liquid gold. I'm sure many of you have heard of colostrum. It's the first milk from the cow. And the reason why it's so important, so like Colostrum is Gold, which is a campaign which is running all through February. So you'll see a few stuff on social media about it. Everyone always goes on and on about colostrum management. But the reason why it is so important is because between the cow and the calf, when the calf is in the uterus, there's a really thick placenta. And that means that there's not many immunoglobulins, which is like immunity proteins that cross to the calf. So the calf is born with a really immature immune system. It doesn't have much immunity to anything. And that's why colostrum exists, because colostrum contains all that immunity for the calf. And also, the calf is also born with its immune system quite immature. So not only is it born with known immunoglobulins, but its B lymphocytes, which are a type of white blood cells, and white blood cells are what fights infection. So they're depressed due to steroids around calving, and it can take about 20 days for those white blood cells to get to adult concentrations. And then the complement cascade, which is another part of the immune system, is also undeveloped in the calf. Especially compared to a human baby at birth. And for cattle, it takes about 6 months for that to fully develop. So again, just gonna launch another poll. So at what age do you think a calf starts producing its own immunoglobulins? So it's born without any, and then its colostrum contains loads from its mother. But then at what age do you think a calf might actually start producing its own? I'll give you a few more seconds on this. I just grab some water. Right, I'll give you 5 more seconds. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Oh, you got it right. Yeah, 4 days old. So it only starts producing its own immunoglobulins by 4 days old, which is great. Well done, everyone. That's perfect. Very clever. Great. And so colostrum not only contains immunoglobulins though, so it's also packed full of fat, protein, growth factors, vitamins and minerals, and they all influence calf health and performance too. So it's so important, but unfortunately it is frequently badly done. So there was a study and it showed that 50% of calves don't receive enough colostrum. And if you get this colostrum right, you're giving a calf a perfect foundation then for the rest of its life. Really is the most important meal. So they will be so much more resilient to everything else you throw at them later in life. So it is incredibly important. And when we think of colostrum management, it can be summarized by these 5 cues. So the first one is quickly. So as soon as the calf's born, the gut, when it's first born, is quite open. It absorbs quite a lot from the gut into the blood quite freely. However, within a few hours, that gut starts to close and less is absorbed into the blood. So that starts immediately from birth and it rapidly declines. So ideally, you get really good absorption to begin with. So up here we have the calf's blood immunoglobulins, so how many immunoglobulins have made it into the blood, and then along here we have the time that the calf was given the colostrum. So if you give the calf colostrum at 2 hours, then we get really nice high levels of immunoglobulins in the blood, and you really want it to be in ideally within 2 hours. If not, then 4 hours still pretty adequate. And 6 hours, so that's the legal requirement. All calves should have had the colostrum by 6 hours. However, as soon as you start waiting longer, you start getting to inadequate levels of immunoglobulins. So it's really important to get this colostrum into the calf as soon as possible. And colostrum quality from the mother does decrease by 3.7% every hour after birth, even if you haven't milked her out. So it's really important to get her milked out as soon as she's calved and get that into the calf as quickly as possible. And then quantity. So generally we say you want to get 10% of the calf's body weight of colostrum into the calf within those 4 hours. So usually a calf might be about 40 kilograms, a newborn calf might be about 40 kilograms. So you want to give them 4 litres within those 4 hours. And then quality. So although this colostrum looks really creamy, looks really thick, looks like it'll be great quality, you can't actually tell by eye how good quality colostrum is. It's been proven numerous times. But we do have some really simple ways of telling the quality of colostrum, like a refractometer or a colostrometer that you just quickly do. Takes less than 30 seconds, and it tells you how good that colostrum is, and then you know whether it's good enough to give the calf or whether you need to be getting some frozen defrosted. Yeah. So, and if a cow gives more than 8.5 litres at her first milking, then 50% of these samples, these colostrums, will be poor quality because she's giving so much. So yeah, if you've got a cow that's given more than 8.5 litres at her first milking, you really do want to be testing the quality of that colostrum and make sure it's good enough. And then squeaky clean. So this is a bit of a cheat really, because we all know squeaky doesn't begin with Q, but it is really important that it is really clean. So you want to be preparing that cow's udder like when you milk her. So it needs to be completely clear of any muck. You need to disinfect it so that there's no bacteria on there, because if there's bacteria in with that colostrum, that bacteria also, not only will it cause disease for that calf, possibly, it will also stop the immunoglobulins being absorbed. So it works in 2 ways to reduce that calf's immunity. So it's really important that it's collected cleanly, that the bucket you put that colostrum in is really good, and it'd be something that you'd want to drink from. And then quantify. So it's worth just making sure that how you're managing your colostrum is good enough, and you are getting enough colostrum and the quality is good enough into these calves, because as we know, a lot of calves don't receive enough, and actually 30% of deaths in the first 3 weeks are thought to be due to the calf not receiving enough colostrum. So it's a really quick test we can do. It's a blood test to see if a calf's had enough colostrum. It's really quick, it's really simple, it's really cheap as well. Abby and Eleanor are going to be delighted because I'm sharing their photos here, but they're our vet techs and they do a great job. They just get on with it on farm. They don't need any help from you guys. They take bloods from all calves that are less than 7 days old, and then tell you usually within the same day kind of the results from those calves. And it's worth knowing whether what your colostrum management is doing is working, because in November these guys took 308 blood samples from calves and they found that 27% of them didn't pass on our colostrum test. So it suggested 27% of those calves hadn't had enough good quality colostrum. Okay. Right, so we've covered colostrum. And then another thing that affects the calf's immunity is any management stresses. So we know ourselves, if we've got something stressful happening in our lives, we're more likely to get spots, or we're more likely to get a cold. And it's the same with calves. Calves are really boring. They really like routine. And as soon as anything changes, it stresses them out. So if you say you're doing disbudding, that is a stressor. If you're castrating, it's another stressor. Now, some of these things are unavoidable when they have to be done, but doing them in the least stressful way possible, like spreading them out so you're not doing loads of things on one day, are all really important ways of minimizing the stress to the calf and then reducing the effect it has on that calf's immunity. Another big stressor for cows and calves is mixing groups. So if you have, say, a calf pen that you just keep adding calves to until it maybe gets to 15, 20 calves, that's actually, and then you keep taking calves out of it when they get big enough, but then keep adding calves, that's actually really stressful for those calves because it's a really dynamic group. It keeps changing. They keep finding new calves and having to make new and that really stresses them out. So trying to keep stable, static groups, groups that don't change, is really important for calves. And at weaning as well, that's another stressful time, so trying to make that as stress-free as possible. And then nutrition, so this also has an effect on calves' immunity. So calves like their nutrition to be the same at the same time every day, same temperature, same amount of concentration. So it's important to keep that as same as possible. In terms of nutrition as well, water is incredibly important. So water really helps get the rumen to develop. If the calf is a little bit dehydrated, it's important that they're drinking water to stay hydrated and to stay healthy, and so they're able to fight disease. So having water from a young age is incredibly important. Access to forage and concentrates is also important in terms of nutrition, because again, that helps the rumen develop. And if there's any malnutrition or negative energy, then that causes just stress and a dip in immunity. And then finally, the environment affects the calf's immunity and vaccination, but we'll concentrate on the environment first. So, with respect to temperature, so we have cold stress and heat stress. So no, Sam mentioned a bit about heat stress during his talk on fertility, and I'll mainly talk about cold stress with calves, but they can be affected by heat stress. And calves have this thermal comfort zone. So that means this is the temperature range that they're most comfortable in. And if you drop below a certain point, so in a calf that's 0 to 3 weeks old, that's 10 degrees C, they'll start suffering from cold stress, which causes a dip in their immunity and makes them less able to fight off disease, and also means that they're using energy from the milk you're giving them, rather than to grow, but then to keep warm. And then in a calf that's about 0 to 3 weeks old, anything above 20 degrees C causes heat stress, which again will affect their immunity, and they'll spend time trying to cool down. So it's important to always try and keep our calves in this thermal comfort zone. However, if we've got any drafts, that are over 0.3 meters per second, then what happens is that cools the calf down. And we know ourselves that if we go outside and stand in the wind, although the temperature might be the same, because we're under a draft, it feels colder. So if you've got a calf that is under a draft, then this lower temperature here will move up to maybe say 12 degrees C. So that means they're experiencing cold stress at a higher temperature, because that draft is making them feel colder at a higher temperature. So it means they're more likely to experience cold stress. So that's why it's really important not to have any drafts at calf level. And again, this table here just shows that if you've got a newborn calf that's in a draft-free environment, then this lower critical temperature, so this, well, they've said about 9 degrees, but then if you put them in a draft that's 2 meters per second, then, which quite a big draft, then actually the lower critical temperature goes up to 17. So that means they start experiencing cold stress at anything below 17 degrees. So yeah, really important. And then moisture has a similar effect as well. So I suppose moisture makes the air feel colder. So if it's raining and 1 degree C, it feels colder than if it's, say, a clear, dry day and maybe -2 degrees C. So if you've got a calf lying on wet straw, it starts diverting energy from growth to maintaining its body temperature instead, at a higher temperature than a calf that's on dry bedding, because its lower critical temperature again has increased. So say if it was on dry bedding, maybe its lower critical temperature would be 10 degrees, but if you put it on wet bedding, then it would more be 12 degrees, and that's because it feels colder, and it's having to put more energy into keeping warm. Yeah, so we've got so we really do need to keep our calves warm. It is a big issue. There was a study that looked at calf mortality, so that means calf deaths in Great Britain, and they found a correlation between the months where the temperature was really low and an increase in calf deaths. So they found the months of the year where the temperatures were low, we had more calves deaths, and they predicted that if we could keep the temperature at maybe about 10 degrees C or above, it would vastly reduce young calf mortality. So we really do need to be keeping these calves warm. So obviously we've got calf jackets, which works just like how we put on a jacket to keep us warm. It's the same principle, although these jackets do need to be clean and dry to do a good job. You can give them some more feed. So as we said, as soon as they can't start getting into this area here, they're using energy to keep warm rather than to put into growth. So and for every 5 degrees drop less than 10 degrees C, we should be giving them about 1/3 of a litre extra over the day. So I guess if you think about this weekend when maybe in your calf shed it was about 0 degrees C, actually we should have been giving them 2/3 of a litre more milk over the day than your calves that maybe you feed in the summer months when the calf shed never falls below 10 degrees C. So we can also give them some more bedding. So again, I'll just got another poll for you. So how long do you think a healthy calf will spend lying down in the day? Good, some of you are still awake. That's great. Okay, brilliant. I'll end the polling there. Great. So yeah, it is 16 hours a day. That's perfect. Great job. Great. So yeah, they spend so much time lying down during the day. So it's really important that they're not lying on wet bedding. So it's a really good idea. There's this nest score. If I can, there we go. So what you do is when you've bedded up and your calves are lying down, if you look and see how much of the legs you can see. So if a score 1 is if you can see all of the legs, score 2 is if half the legs are buried in the straw, and a score 3 is where you can't see the legs at all. And you want to bed them up so that most of the calves are, well, all the calves are score 2 or above. So here's a great example of a calf I saw out on farm. It's definitely a score 3. It's really nicely bedded up. It should be really nice and warm. So that's perfect. And then there's also heat lamps. So these are really underutilized, really. You could use, say, a 250 watt infrared bulbs over individual pens. So you could put them just over the dividers, so 1 per 2 pens, or you could use a 1500 watt linear heater wall mounted or hanging a lamp above the group pens, and then the calves can move in and out of the heat depending on how cold they feel. And again, that will just help keep them warm. And I suppose the ideal scenario for all these temperature things would be to have a thermometer in your calf shed, and then you can see when, and decide on temperature, say whether it's 10 degrees, and when that falls below 10 degrees C, you can start implementing some of these things, whether that's feeding them more, giving them more bedding, or you could set up your lamps on a temperature thermostat, so when the temperature, say, drops below 5 degrees or so, the lamps come on. So there'd be various different ways to try and keep your calves nice and warm. Okay, so we've covered all that. The last thing about immunity is vaccination. So the great news is that unlike the COVID vaccine, we don't need to rely on one to be produced. We've already got some, and we've got quite a few. So we've got vaccines that are against both bacteria and viruses, and quite often the vaccines contain a few of these different bugs. And how a vaccine works is it gives the calf a little bit of inactivated or modified bacteria or virus, so that the calf's immune system finds that, it recognizes it, it creates an immune response against it, and then next time when the calf actually meets that actual disease, it recognizes it really well, it knows exactly what to do, it recruits all the white blood cells it needs and creates a really big immune response, so it creates a really effective response. So you're just priming the calf's immune system, really. They are really effective. There's one study that found pneumonia vaccination was associated with higher heifer weights. So at 8 months old, vaccinated calves weighed over 45 kilograms more than unvaccinated calves. There's different ways of giving them. So some we can give up the nose, some are an injection. And there's different onsets of immunity. So some of the vaccines maybe will start working within 4 days of you giving it. So you give the calf the vaccine, and then 4 days later, this should have enough immunity that if they come into contact with it, they'll mount a really good immune response. But some of certainly the injection ones, you have to wait till about 2 weeks after the second dose to get the full immunity. So it's important that also we're getting these vaccines in quick enough for when your pneumonia risk is, which fits really nicely with the best vaccine for your farm. Will depend on what's on your farm, what the scenario is, when the calves get infected, what your calf system's like, where your calves come from. Is it just your farm, or are you buying in from a few different farms? And it will also depend on what bugs that you have on your farm, because they cover these vaccines cover different bugs. So we can find out what bugs are on your farm by either taking a bit of a lung wash. So that's either a transtracheal or bronchoalveolar lavage, which is just a bit of a fancy word for a lung wash, really. And you put a tube down the calf while it's alive. It will be sedated, and just take a little bit of a sample, and you can find out kind of what's causing the pneumonia you're seeing in that calf. And you do want to take these samples kind of just as the calf's going ill. You want to take it really early on in the disease process. You can also do blood tests to find out either what the calf's been exposed to younger in life. So you might do some blood tests when the calves are maybe 5 to 8 months old and see kind of what pneumonia bugs they've been exposed to earlier in life. or you can do paired bloods, so you can take bloods at the time of the outbreak, just as it's kicking off, before probably they've mounted antibodies to it, and then you take another blood test 2 to 3 weeks later, and you look at what antibodies they've developed over that time and what they've been in contact with. And then the last one is we can take samples from post-mortems. So if we find pneumonia on a post-mortem, we can take samples and try and find what the initial cause was. Okay, so we've kind of covered all the different things that influence the calf's immunity and how we try and boost that. And now I'll just go into a bit about the infection pressures. So this is what we want to reduce as much as possible. So I did speak a bit about the environment in the other talk, and this is all about the environment too. So we need to keep the amount of disease on the farm just generally low. So if you're having an outbreak of a disease, say salmonella or BVD or something like that, there'll be unfortunately so much of that disease circulating on farm that the calves will be under great stress and great pressure, because there'll be cows shedding it all over the place, there'll be calves shedding it everywhere. So it's just important with any disease outbreak to try and get on top of it as soon as possible, and try and keep the levels of disease just in general on farm as low as possible. In the calving pen, we want to keep the amount of disease in the calving pen really low, because that's the first place the calf is born. It's the first bit area of life where the calf comes into contact with, so it's important it's born. And as I said before, that's when the calf has no immunoglobulins, so it's important that that's as clean as possible. We want to keep the amount of disease in the calf pens as low as possible. So actually I'd probably say that the stocking density in this calf pen is too high. The nest score is really nice, you can't really see their legs. But yeah, they've got too many calves. You kind of want 3 meters squared ideally per calf. So they're probably overstocked, because the more stock you have, the more shedding of bugs, the more moisture as well. And bugs love moisture, they love wet conditions, they thrive really well in it. And also in the calf pens, as we spoke about bedding up for keeping them warm, but also bedding up for creating a barrier, like a physical barrier, I guess, between any scour bugs or any other bugs and the calf itself. And then also, if you have a sick animal, if you get onto it early and remove it from that pen, and ideally from that airspace, so from that building as soon as possible, then you'll reduce the amount of bugs just generally in that area, because a sick animal will always be shedding lots and lots of bugs. That's why you should also never move a poor doing calf down a group, because you're just taking that poor doing calf that's probably shedding bugs to your vulnerable younger calves and challenging all them. And then the amount of disease that's in the air as well. So we always want fresh air coming into our building to take out all those bugs that I talked about that are just circulating in the air. So this is all down to ventilation, and generally we don't want the calves in the same airspace, the same building as any animals that are 3 months old or older, because they'll be shedding bugs. So generally, other bigger animals will ventilate buildings by the stack effect. So what that means is the cow will produce heat, and that heat will warm the air that comes in from the sides of the building. It will warm the air, and then that's pushed out the top and escapes, and the air escaping at the top will then push in more air from the sides. However, calves do not produce enough heat to create this stack effect. So there's often very little air movement in a calf building because they're not producing much heat. So instead, it's often advised to get some mechanical ventilation in, and this works really well with like a tunnel and duct like this. This is constantly pushing fresh air into the building, and that means the old stale air that's full of bugs will be pushed out. And then just generally on equipment, So we want to reduce the amount of disease on equipment as much as possible. So obviously in automatic milk feeders, every calf is drinking from the same teat or same couple of teats. So it's really important that they're changed at least twice a day, they're disinfected thoroughly, that your buckets that have had milk in as well. Milk is like a perfect environment for bugs to grow in. So it's really important that you clean these really well between feeds, and every calf has its own bucket. And same with stomach tubes. You want to have a separate stomach tube for tubing colostrum than one for a sick calf, because the one for a sick calf possibly has disease and things on it, and you don't want to be giving that disease to your new, young, vulnerable calf. So yeah, it's really important to keep those really clean. So prevention of pneumonia, is just summarised by this slide. So we just want to keep the immunity, so the colostrum, nutrition, management, stresses and environment, vaccination. We want to look at all those areas and make sure we're doing everything we can to keep calf's immunity as good as possible. And then we want to do as much as we can to reduce the infection pressure the calf comes into contact with from all these different areas. And then we'll just move on to treatment. So as I touched on earlier, the sooner the better. So really important part of treatment is the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. This is generally Metacam or Loxicon because they last 3 days. And a lot of these bugs are viral. And we know ourselves when we get a virus, quite often they do last a week or so. So we want a long-acting anti-inflammatory on board. And it's really important to keep the calf's temperature down, and to keep them wanting to drink, and it reduces inflammation. And then antibiotics. So generally we give these as they get rid of all those bacteria that kind of jumps in and makes the pneumonia worse, the Pasteurella, etc. So yeah, they're also usually quite important in calf pneumonia. And then sometimes other medications are prescribed, so things like steroids, as they're quite potent anti-inflammatories, but it's always worth using those in discussion with your vet, because you've got to be careful about using them alongside your Metacam and Loxicon. And then should we be isolating these? Well, if we pick them up early and we don't have pneumonia through the whole group already, then it probably is worth taking them out, putting them in a separate airspace before they start shedding loads and infecting the air. But we do have to pick them up early to do that. If the whole group is affected, like obviously we don't really want to get to that situation, we want to stem it before that, but sometimes it's inevitable, but definitely we don't want to be doing it routinely, treating the whole group. And then should we just keep treating them? Like, I'm sure you know of the cases where the calf just keeps going down with pneumonia. But actually, we found that by the third treatment for pneumonia, you only really get a 37% response to any treatment. So is not a great cure rate once you start getting to the chronic pneumonia stage. And then when do you start treating? Well, it's useful to use, this is quite a good chart to use. So you're looking at the eyes, the nose, the ears and head tilt, whether they're coughing, what the breathing's like and what the temperature is. And then you give them a score depending on what they're doing. So for example, if they've got any eye discharge at all, apologies again for the picture quality here, but yeah, if they've got any discharge at all, then they're a score 2. If they've got any discharge at the nose as well, whether that's clear or really yellow, then that's a score 4. If they've got ear droop or head tilt at all, like these calves, then that's a score 5. If they've got a cough, 2. If they're breathing rapidly, 2. If they've got a temperature, 2. And if your score adds up to 5 or more, then we recommend treating them. So take-home messages is don't ignore pneumonia. It's not something to become complacent about. And also the calves are a really important part of your farm. That we've got many different causes of pneumonia, different viruses, different bacteria. And then our pneumonia outbreaks happen because of an imbalance between a calf's immunity and the infection pressure that the calf comes into contact with. And there's loads you can do to improve your calf health and reduce pneumonia. And if you want to discuss it further, just ask your vets, and I'm sure they'll come out and do some assessments for you. And treatment is best started early. Okay, so we're on to questions. Let's have a look. I'll just see. I think Amy was just going to message me if there were some questions. I'll just have a look. Right. Okay. So we've got one that is, what is the cost of blood testing calves to assess colostrum management? So the cost is, I think it's about £3.70 per calf. But if you're on our calf club, which is £25 a month, it's included in that. And as well, in that cost, then you also get calf growth rates, you get any pneumonia vaccines, the administration of any pneumonia vaccines, and you get a discounted rate on disbudding as well. So it really is a steal, that calf club. Do I find that pneumonia has a certain smell? I'm not sure. I haven't noticed a certain smell with pneumonia, really. Amy, are you still here? Do you ever notice a certain smell with pneumonia? Certainly if there's...
I have a very poor sense of smell. But I know what you mean. Sometimes you can smell certain diseases, like metritis has a certain smell, but maybe that's just a skill you have, Abby. That's amazing.
Yeah, wish I had that. Okay, so is the decreased milk production from the poll the same for a suckler cow? No, that is dairy data. So it won't be the same for a suckler cow because their literage will be lower, but there will definitely be a decreased amount of milk that they'll give when they go into lactation as well. And then, are you more or less likely or the same likely to get pneumonia using a straw chopper with very dusty bedding? Yeah, great question. So that you are more likely to get pneumonia if you're using kind of really dusty bedding and you're creating loads of abrasive aerosols in the air. You know yourself that if you go into a dusty area, then you start coughing. So yeah, definitely if you've got, and also if you can smell ammonia is quite nasty to the lung surface. So it creates, it makes the lung function not work as well. Sorry, I'm not sure I'm explaining this very well. I've obviously been talking too long, but definitely any dusty stuff in the air or ammonia in the air, it impairs the respiratory function. Okay, I'm just going to do one more question. Okay, so are higher oil to protein milk replacers better for calf growth and health? Oh, good question. So definitely you want your calf milk replacer to have between 22 and 26% protein, and you want it to have, I think, at least 20% oil. So you want those basics to be met. Now, having more oil to protein, I'm not sure that they've actually done any studies to show that it'll certainly increase the energy content of the milk replacer, but you also need to make sure that they're also eating enough concentrates, that it's not repressing that at all. So I don't think well, as far as I'm aware, I'm not sure that they've done any studies to show that a higher oil to protein milk replacer does do better for calf growth and health. But I'll have a quick look, I'll have a chat to some people, and if I find anything the contrary, then I'll give you all an email and let you all know if there is anything more on that. But just off the top of my head and from my knowledge right now, that's as much as I'd say. Okay, I'm more than aware that I've taken up a lot of your time. And obviously I want you to all go and enjoy your evening. So any questions that I haven't answered, I will give you an email, answer them in an email. And I just wanted to wish you all a happy February dairy. So don't worry, all of us at Oak Hill will be eating and drinking loads of dairy this month to support our dairy industry, and we'll be sharing stuff on our Facebook and things just to support you guys. And our next talk, so it's in a fortnight's time, it's on calving cows and first aid with Laura. And yeah, our courses at the moment obviously are running remotely, so we struggle to do foot trimming remotely, so that's not running at the moment. But generally, over all our courses and things, then we have a young farmer 10% discount. So if you book on any, let us know that you're a young farmer, we'll make sure you get the discount. So thank you all for logging on, and thank you all for continuing to support this series. I hope you're finding it useful. If you've got any feedback, anything you think we could be doing better or differently, let us know. But yeah, thank you all for logging on.
Thank you, Susie.
Thanks, bye.